Today's webinar, Marketing in a Post-Mobile World, will be presented by Kalev Peekna. Kalev and his team design digital marketing strategies and interactive experiences for complex, relationship-based organizations. His team works with clients on channel strategies, user research, brand alignment, content strategy, information architecture, and the user experience of professional websites and other interactive properties. With that, I'll pass it over to Kalev.
Thanks, Kayla. Welcome, everybody. As Kayla said, I'm Kalev Peekna. I'm also known as the Bowtie Guy, and was most recently called that guy who sounds kind of like a deranged elf. I can't do anything about the quality of my voice, so hopefully I can make it up in the material. I'm here to talk to you today about mobile, and specifically the future of mobile strategy. So the agenda is actually relatively straightforward. I'm going to start just by taking a look at current data, because I think that's always a good idea. And then I'm going to outline 3 phases of mobile strategy and take you through where we've been, where I think we are, and where I think we're going to go. So first, in the review, before I actually get into all the data that you're about to see, just want to say, for the sake of people who might be trying to frantically take notes or surreptitiously take screenshots, there's no point to doing that. Don't worry, we're going to publish the deck upwards, so you will have access to all of this. So you can just sit back and think more about what it means than rather trying to record the statistics. I've also noted the sources if you ever want to go directly to them. So just getting into it, I think many people may have seen this photo. This is actually a photo from the comparison of the last time a new pope was announced in 2005 with Pope Benedict, and then this most recent time in 2013 with the announcement of Pope Francis. And a lot of people were struck, this is images initially from the Daily Mail, by just how different it looked. I kind of find this really interesting. Obviously, seas of people waiting for the announcement of the Pope. There's one person with a tiny little flip phone maybe trying to take an image. And then in 2013, all you see are small handheld screens. In fact, you see more screens than people. In case you thought, as some people did, that maybe the photographer had found just the right angle, you can take a look at CNN view of the exact same scene and see, you know, it's obvious that just about every person in that crowd is having a mobile moment. And it even fed into the princes of the church, the cardinals themselves. This image is actually pretty funny. It comes from a story where the Pope actually scolded the cardinals for doing the same thing, which is pulling out their handhelds in the middle of important moments. So just to review some of the data that we've seen, most of this comes from Mary Meeker's Internet Trends from Kleiner Perkins. Always a really interesting report every year it comes out. But from 1995 to 2014, so about 20 years, we've seen Internet usage grow a lot. It's grown from about 35 million users worldwide to about 2.8 billion users worldwide. Obviously an immense change. It has about 40% population penetration now, have regular access to the Internet. However, when you compare that to the growth in mobile, it looks like it's actually kind of been lagging. And this number really shocked me, even though I take a look at these every single year. In 1995, there were about 80 million regular mobile users. In 2014, there are 5.2 billion, which means that mobile now reaches 73% of the world's population. It's also become our favorite screen. So I think all of us think we're inundated with screens, which interesting is that just recently, like within the last year, it's flipped to become our absolutely the favorite screen. In other words, we spend more time looking at our mobile screen than we do at our desktop or tablet or any other screen that's in our life. 51% of the total screen time is spent with our mobile device. And as mobile grows, we actually have a lot more data and better data about how it's used. So I could have gone on for probably 20 more minutes just going with the interesting statistics. And instead of doing that, I'm going to point you to some resources that you can actually look. If you're interested in a deeper dive or more specific questions, one of the most interesting data sources that I use is actually Google's Mobile Planet. It's an interactive data resource, and it allows you to create custom charts based on research that they did in 2013. You can, for example, select specific dimensions. And just as an example, I selected a couple age ranges as well as 4 specific questions and produced this quote-unquote custom chart. And this one, I think, it's just an example, but it's interesting. It shows that a strong majority of users, regardless of the age range, really, in any meaningful way, think that accessing the web on the mobile is just as easy as it is on any other device. But the emotional attachment is much stronger for people who are younger to their mobile device. And there's a much larger percentage of people here who are even just Gen X, as opposed to being baby boomer, would much rather give up their TV or some other kind of computer than their smartphone. Another great source is ComScore. They offer regular free reports just on general trends. By regular, I mean a handful a month. I mean, it's really a pretty frequent reporting of trend data within mobile as well as general internet activity. There's a paid option if you're interested that they will actually, do a direct comparison of you and your peers if you're interested in that. But just from the free data, you can find a lot of really interesting insights. On the left here, you have a graph that's showing general preferences for mobile versus desktop for certain kinds of activity. You see there's a slight preference for mobile for things like taking photos and doing games, a slight preference for desktop for things like general news and email. What's fascinating, especially if you look at some of the historical reports, is how close everything is coming to that center line. What I see is that it's not actually a big split, but what I notice is that there's really nothing in the corners, meaning there's really no activity that is so strongly skewing towards one platform or another that they won't actually do the activity on the other platform. And I think that's really the strong lesson of that graph. On the right, another really interesting thing that has come up a lot in our work here at One North, which is just an awareness that people have multiple devices and that they prefer different type devices at different times of the day. So here the data is showing that people use their mobile device during their commute to kind of deal with those first emails and maybe check some news. They use PCs or laptops during the working hours, seems obvious why, and then at night they're using tablets. So it really goes to saying that if you're trying to market into these moments, being aware of the time of day that device tends to be used can become really important. So what does all this mean? Well, basically, everything is trending upward. So mobile just is continuing to rise in influence. More people have them. People use mobile more often. People depend on their mobile devices. It's not ancillary to work anymore or to business. It's something that is absolutely critical. They also expect it to just work. A lot of the data has really talked about that. It's not something that they want to think about or learn how to use. It has to just work. And the trends really march upwards across all user dimensions and all user groups, to which most of you probably think that's really very obvious. And I acknowledge that. You will find some people talking about slowness in the growth of mobile, and I think that's important for people who sell mobile devices. I think the reason for that is pretty obvious. Everybody pretty much has a mobile device right now, but it doesn't mean that mobile is any less important, particularly to marketers. So what is this ongoing, seemingly relentless mobile dominance, the story we've been talking to ourselves for about 5 years, really mean for mobile strategy? Well, really, I would say that mobile strategy, despite the fact that mobile devices have been around since the mid-90s, accessible mobile devices, I would say, really only started taking off in 2007 with the rise of smartphones. And we've really here put it in 3 phases. The first I'd call the squeeze, which is focused really on operational aspects of building out a mobile presence. The second we're calling mobile moments, which is really about refining that mobile experience to hit specific needs. And the last we're calling post-mobile, and this is my dastardly trick to get you to stick around for the end of the webinar because I'm not going to describe it just yet. If I were to put out a timeline, it probably looked like this. About 2008 is really when people seriously started taking consideration of mobile as a marketing platform and figuring out how to build a presence within that channel. I'd say last year was probably the turning point for going into what I'm calling the mobile moments phase. And, well, I'll admit the 2020 date is purely arbitrary, but that's probably when I think people will really start taking post-mobile seriously. So the first phase, the squeeze. This point, mobile strategy at this point, it started in about 2007. Really, people started to get going in about 2008, and it's really focused on what we're calling operational aspects of a decent mobile experience. And that includes things like responsive design, performance, SEO. In other words, what I like to call this is the strategy that equals how do I fit all my stuff on the small screen? Because this is pretty much what it's been feeling like. And a lot of marketers have been dealing with essentially this problem. How do I get the entirety of my digital marketing onto this tiny 3, 4, maybe 5-inch screen? Let's first talk about responsive design. So it actually arrived kind of late into the scene. It didn't exist in 2008. It was actually invented in 2010. And I've referenced here actually the article that coined the term and introduced it. I still think it's a really interesting read if you want to go back. It's amazing how far-sighted I think that article was able to be. But in 2008, we really had two main options for most people. You could build out a separate mobile site. It was dedicated, but it had pretty limited functionality. It wasn't trying to be everything that your main website was. And that meant that it was really often very fragmented. People had a main website that looked great, that created a specific feeling that furthered the brand. And often the mobile site was just really functional, really reduced, not really much there, not much of a brand presence at all. And it meant that you very often had to do dual content entry. So you were maintaining a main website, and now you were maintaining a mobile website. Once Apple started accepting external apps and Android got underway, a lot of people started evaluating platform apps, which really had enhanced functionality and could be really cool. A lot of people really wanted an app. I heard from a lot of marketers who said, my partners really want an app, my business owners really want an app, and I understood why. But they were always restricted to specific platforms, either Apple or Android. A lot of updates were required, sometimes just by the phones themselves. The phones would update, or the software would update, and you would find yourself having to update your app, even if you had nothing from your part that you wanted to change. And frankly, the engagement metrics on platform apps have always been really poor, especially for marketing. I think it's a really high bar to deliver value in a way that gets people to download it and use it regularly. And of course, finally, in 2010, we got responsive design, which seemed to solve a lot of problems. I'm not going to go into the details of responsive design. I'm going to pretty much assume that everybody on this webinar understands what it is. But because it's for all users, all devices, by definition, it delivers a consistent experience. Because it's future-proofed, it really started to win out. In fact, now the way that we talk about it, responsive design is really the only choice for websites that are primarily driven by content. And you can see all kinds of organizations from professional services, and B2B, or general news sites, including CNN, which has so much content you wouldn't think that it'd be possible for them to squeeze it into a responsive site. Everybody's pretty much going responsive. And what's also fascinating is to watch the variation of design. I think, I've heard from some people that sometimes all responsive sites, quote unquote, look alike. I don't think even just looking at this small sampling here that you can claim the same thing. What's really fascinating is to see the variation of design. Now, as one caveat, I'm often asked, does that mean that there's no point to ever having a separate mobile site or an app? No, of course not. I think there are situations. But those usually apply to the kinds of businesses where mobile behavior is markedly different than it would be for your main website. And I'm thinking something like a Target or an Amazon. If Target tried to squeeze its entire site into a mobile app, I might actually get annoyed because my mobile buying patterns might actually be really different than the way that I'm going to browse Target.com or even shop through the Target store. I'm going to want an experience that's more customized for mobile. But for sites that are primarily driven by content consumption, and that includes the .com for most professional services or B2B sites, responsive design is really the only strategy that makes sense. So having said all of that, hopefully I've convinced you or you're already on board that responsive design is the way to go. There's a flip side that is a little bit ironic, and this is a quote, sorry for the slight rudeness, but this is a quote from Brad Frost, who is really a great thought leader in all things digital. He's definitely something that a lot of One Northerners, somebody that a lot of One Northerners follow on a regular basis. And he points out something that's really essential, which is as much work as you put into creating responsive design for your site, your visitors don't really care. And that's because what they really care about is whether or not your site operates and performs well. They don't care what specific design strategy you use to get there. Responsive design really solves the part of it operating well because it's by definition the same functionality you have on your website, but it doesn't guarantee the second part, which is performance, meaning how fast is it, can it keep up with me? And performance is really, really important. So now we're beginning to understand that performance is essential a part of mobile strategy as design. And here's just a few statistics that will really give you pause if you're not currently paying attention to performance. At about the 1 second mark, as somebody brings up your page, that's when you'll start to lose your first visitors who get impatient. After about 3 seconds, you can expect on losing about 40% of visitors who will stop waiting for the page to load. And when users were asked, really only about as many as 75% said they would leave a page if it took longer than 4 seconds to load. And those are really sobering statistics, so it means you really have to pay attention to how fast is your site. There are, helpfully, however, some tools that can help you out. And so if you want to start taking a look at your site and how fast it is and what might be slowing down, just keep in mind that responsive design isn't necessarily the solution to high performance, but it's also not necessarily the problem. Literally the content that you put in, the text that you put in, the imagery, and especially the video that you put in, all play a role in reducing the kind of complexity and keeping things fast. And tools like Google PageSpeed Insights, Web Page Test, or Pingdom, these are all tools that our developers use to measure performance, can help you understand what specifically is slowing down a particular page in your site. So mobile SEO has recently become a really interesting topic. In fact, I'm interested to hear how many people on the phone actually heard about Mobilegeddon. But earlier this year, about 3 months ago in April, Google released a major update to its core engine. And I think pretty much every time it does that, the whole world freaks out. But they especially freaked out about this one. And in fact, people started calling this change, instead of some cute name like Panda or Penguin, they started calling it Mobilegeddon. But here's the change that they made, because it's actually relatively straightforward. For mobile users only, and I can't stress that enough, it only affected people who were doing searches from a mobile device. But for those people, Google started to prioritize mobile-friendly results. And sites that were not mobile-friendly started to appear lower if you were doing search from a mobile site. So in essence, Google was just trying to match the mobile search to the mobile-friendly site, and assuming that somebody on a mobile device would rather look at a mobile-friendly site than some other site. It seems straightforward, right? But trust me, the whole world freaked out. And in part, that's because I think Google was already aware of a threshold that was about to happen. So 2 weeks after it made that change, Google revealed on one of its blogs, I've got the link down here at the bottom, that mobile devices now generate more searches on desktops in the U.S. and Japan, meaning more searches are coming from a mobile device than on a desktop device. And it had been edging up, but in May, early May was when it finally tipped over, and search is pretty much a mobile-dominated activity, at least in these two countries. A lot of people were curious about just how many people were really going to be hurt by this. Was it really ever going to matter? According to ADI, they said, yeah, it did have an impact. Non-mobile friendly sites have suffered an almost 10% drop in traffic, according to their estimates. And they did see some people use techniques like paid search to stanch the bleeding for a little bit, but even people who are trying to throw money at the problem can no longer fix the problem, meaning it's having a permanent, if not huge, effect on how much traffic is being driven to these sites via search. The big question, of course, with this change is, like, what the heck does mobile-friendly mean? Because Google originally didn't sound like they were defining it. In fact, I read some things that said, well, you know, only Google gets to define this. It's not fair. Well, they actually give you a huge amount of guidance and tools that will help you ensure that your site is mobile-friendly. The link here, again, is at the bottom if you want to take a look at it. But here's some of the highlights: responsive design, proper redirects, which is really only needed if you have a separate mobile site. If you're following responsive design, redirects don't apply. Being touch-friendly, being high performance. In other words, all they're saying is the other components of the mobile strategy that we already talked about. If you've got a responsive site and you're ensuring that it's fast and you're ensuring that it's touch-friendly, you're fine. None of this change will impact you. So I went over all those things with an awareness that not a lot of people are actually completely caught up with that. But the good news is that these standards are well recognized and understood, and you're in pretty good company. So according to Google, 82% of their surveyed web owners, they're pursuing responsive design, right? And that's just a statistic that supports what I said. It's the dominant strategy. However, according to Akamai, and this is interesting, only about 20% of the top 1,000 websites are currently responsive, and of the top 100 websites, only 12% are currently responsive. So, you know, a lot of people have some catching up to do. Here's the bad news about this, however. Like all best practices, this stage of mobile strategies, responsive design, performance, mobile SEO, they can no longer offer innovation and differentiation. These are table stakes when it comes to having a mobile presence and doing really any kind of mobile marketing. These are things that you really ought to be doing right now if you aren't. That brings us to the second phase of mobile strategy, which I'm calling mobile moments. I actually stole this phrase from a great book that I recommend. It comes from three people out of Forrester Research who put together a book called The Mobile Mind Shift. So the first phase, the squeeze, is, I called it a mobile strategy, but the truth is I don't think it's very strategic, or at least it's not strategic anymore. It's about enabling what you're doing already. This next phase, the mobile moment, is about approaching mobile as a unique context that has its own opportunities. And here's how they define one of the core ideas in this book, the mobile moment. They say that a mobile moment is a point in time and space when somebody pulls out a mobile device to get what he or she wants immediately in context. And I think if you were to reflect a little bit just about how you use your mobile device, yeah, that's probably just how you use it, right? You want what you want from it whenever, and you want to be able to complete that task or action right then and there, right? You don't really want to have to be able to do, you don't really want to have to do a lot of other things to make that work. So what's really different about that? I think the key thing, if you read the book and go through their explanation, is that they're asking you to change the default order of your thinking. In other words, the squeeze was about taking everything you do, so kind of starting with yourself, the firm down here at the building, and saying, how do I get that into a mobile device so that I can make sure I make it to the customer, right? In other words, you already have a marketing communication strategy, and it's really about, like, how do I squeeze it into that device? The mobile moment, what they're asking you is to flip that and start instead with the customer. It's saying, think really hard about what that moment is like, what that user is doing, why they're interacting with their phone, and then build out everything from there. So in other words, the mobile moment is really all about context sensitivity. What do I mean by context? It's definitely a heavily used phrase in design, user experience, and in digital strategy overall. But the best way to think about it is it's any aspect of the user's mindset or world that could impact what they're trying to accomplish and how they want to interact. And I outlined just a few contexts that could be relevant to B2B. So the date and time. Context that would matter for B2B include things like, is this before, during, or after work? Is it something on the weekend? Or thinking even just a little bit more business-minded, is this close to a quarterly or a year-end? Really thinking about time as something that could affect what somebody wants to do. Location. That can mean country or market, so some simple geolocation, right, especially for larger businesses. But it can also be a way to imply language. It can also be a little bit more personal. Are they home? Are they in the office? Are they traveling? Are they commuting? And these are all aspects of location that we sometimes consider when designing mobile interactions. The activity, meaning what were they trying to do? Why did they even have their mobile device out anyway? Right? Like, why did they even take that phone out of their pocket? Were they just keeping up to date, meaning scrolling through BuzzFeed and the CNN app and just looking through news because they're kind of bored? Were they reviewing something that somebody sent them? Were they looking at materials? Were they actively researching? Were they looking for something? Right? Were they writing or producing, which is more and more common? Or were they simply communicating? Were they texting, emailing, chatting? Thinking about that activity, thinking about why they pulled that device out of their pocket, particularly with respect to location and time, can really help you understand what's the best way to get somebody to interact. And finally, even things like relationship. What company do they belong to? What does their business network look like? Where are they kind of like in LinkedIn? What industry are they in? What social groups? All of these are valid contexts for mobile. But what does a mobile moment look like? I do actually have some examples of some people that I think really nail a great mobile moment. The book that I mentioned, The Mobile Mind Shift, has several others. I tried to actually pull some that weren't necessarily in the book. I'm going to start with talking about Google Now. I have here the quote, which is really kind of a gesture to my last webinar, but it's basically how I think Pride and Prejudice would have been open if Jane Austen wrote it this year, which is that it's a truth universally acknowledged that Google knows basically everything about all of us. And what's fascinating is that Google now turns this incredible set of knowledge into something really useful. If you haven't seen it, it's built directly into the search app on iOS or Android, even on desktop. It actually tries to get you the information before you enter a keyword, right? So it's trying to predict what is it that you want to know before you even type anything. And it can show you when to leave for the airport, nearby restaurants, local events, sports scores, whatever those happen to be, favorite shows or podcasts, news, articles, all of this stuff. Here's some screenshots of how it looks. So, it'll show you before you even open up maps how long it's going to take you to get to home. It's going to assume you want to go home based on the time of day. So it's being really, really attentive to the specifics of that context. It knows when you're flying, based usually on your email, whether it receives a confirmation. It'll tell you the status of it so that you don't have to look for the status. So it'll tell you whether there's been any changes. It'll offer you a quick link to directions. It'll even track shipments that you've made to yourself. And this last one is actually from my Google Now. I think it's fascinating. It knows that immediately after this meeting, I'm going to head out to New York for a trip there. It knows, based on my searching, somehow that I cracked my iPad screen and was looking into getting a replacement. And if you were really attentive down here, you can see it even knows that I was doing a lot of research for this webinar because it's trying to suggest other content with regard to mobile. But I'm going to show you actually kind of a less sexy example. The USAA, which I call the world's least interesting bank, is really known as a very reliable, safe bank. It actually serves members of the military and their families, as well as veterans. It's never been known as a risk taker. It was actually known as very stable and safe throughout the financial crisis. But it actually has one of the most advanced mobile apps in retail banking. So it does all the stuff that you think it should do. You can deposit, taking a photo of the check. You can check your balance. You can do transfers. You can do bill pay. You can do peer to pay. It's got an ATM finder. But it actually starts to do some certain other things that are really specific to mobile, things that wouldn't even make sense to really have like on a desktop. Roadside assistance automatically, right? A rental car locator, accident checklist in case you actually happen to get an accident. The app will tell you exactly what it is that you need to do. You can submit a claim. You can calculate a loan, and their theory is, what if you're out shopping for a car? I don't know if I can get back to my laptop or desktop to check whether the loan I'm being offered by the car dealership is as competitive as the one I could get from my bank. And finally, it's even put in face recognition or voice recognition for logging into the phone because it knows that typing in a secure password, especially a password that is not 111111, is a pain in the ass on the phone, so it knows that. It's offering some biometric ways to log in. And it offers a lot of natural language ways to interact with the app. So you can just tell it, pay my credit card this weekend, and it will schedule the payment for the right amount at the right time. What does it take to actually create moments like these? The Mobile Mindshift book actually recommends a 4-step process that it calls IDEA, identify, design, engineer, analyze. I know, groundbreaking, yet another process that results in an acronym. I understand. I know what you're saying. I feel you. But actually, it doesn't bother me because if you look at what this looks like, identify, which means understanding the mobile context and really what does that moment look like. Design, meaning really pay attention to not just the screen but to the entire engagement. Engineer the platforms needed to make it happen. Look at the results. That's really the basic steps in any good user-centric design process. That's not groundbreaking at all. In fact, any user design process, you could look up 100 books on what it means to do user-centric design, and they will all look more or less like this with only a few nuances. And that really points out the fact that mobile moments really are about design. It's about design strategy. And that's because design strategy is uniquely equipped to deal with issues of relevance, refinement, and engagement. It's uniquely equipped to deal with context sensitivity, the idea of physical interaction, animations, transitions, visual and emotional feedback. Right? It's the key to providing value that is unique to mobile and can't be delivered in any other platform. So what does this really mean? Well, another way of looking at this shift from the squeeze to mobile moment is to say we've moved from thinking about platforms and operations to design. right? And this is where I think we are right now. At least we're getting started on this. This is the change that I've noticed recently, is that we're no longer talking about how to get it into mobile. We're talking about how do we best design for specifically. Of course, there's still one more stage left. What's left? So here's the thing, here's where at least I started my thinking on what's really beyond this, right? Looking into the future, let's assume that we're just going to do an awesome job of designing these mobile moments. What more could we want? Like, what more could we ask for? Well, it really occurs to me that if there's any flaw in that thinking, it's the emphasis on the word moments or the details, right? It's incredibly important to hit those. Those micro-interactions, as we call them, they're inspiring, they're effective, but they can also become really fragmented, meaning they're siloed, they're on their own. And then I started asking questions, what about the connections between mobile and everything else that we're doing? And that is what really led me to think about what happens post-mobile. So I'm going to ask for your indulgence, because to explain the line of thinking here, we're going to dial it back to 1996. I really hope there's at least some people on the webinar that are old enough to remember this moment. I know I do. When the internet was suddenly a thing, right? It was a business topic. In and of itself, it was exciting, it was changing everything. We found ourselves saying things like this: I know, I could use the internet to do this. And did you know that you could do that on the internet now? And can you teach me how to internet stuff? Actual quote from runaway relatives. And I really like to spend time on the internet. And there were even books and videos, huge numbers of things teaching people how to basically internet, like this children's book right here. He's hopefully surfing on a keyboard. Get it? He's surfing. Get it? And in case you think that I'm making this all up, that we couldn't be that corny, I am going to pause and show you a little bit for one of my favorite items on YouTube, which is the Kid's Guide to the Internet, circa 1996. Don't worry, we won't watch long. It's good even just for the intro song.
On your mark, get set. We're riding on the internet. Cyberspace, set free. Hello, virtual reality. Interactive appetite. Searching for a website. A window to the world that you get online. Ain't to spin now you're in with techno tech. You're going surfing on the internet.
Hey there, it's us again.
All right, I won't torture you anymore. It's totally epic. It's awesome. I recommend you watch it, but not too many times, or that song could get stuck in your head, and you'll want to cut off your own ears to stop it. So I remember this moment pretty well because when I was coming out of graduate school and first shifting to the professional world, one of my first jobs involved as an ancillary duty that I had to teach all new employees at the company that I was in how to use the internet. So every Monday I would go in with a new batch of employees and we would sit down on the basics of using the internet because it was totally new to having in the workplace. And I know what you're thinking. You're saying to yourself, come on, Kalev, nobody could possibly be that old. I mean, maybe Betty White, and even she knows how to internet, right? And I understand what you're saying. The point is to ask your question, like, why don't we talk like this anymore? Why don't we talk about the internet? I can't remember the last time I had a conversation with somebody about the internet, and that's because we internet all the time, everywhere, all day. It's not that it went away. It's not that it doesn't mean anything to us. It's still incredibly important. It's just the fact that it's everywhere, the fact that it's so pervasive means it's silly to talk about as a thing. We would never say to ourselves, I know, I'll use the internet to do that. We just know we can. Right? So it's not that we're using the internet, we're just talking to people. We're sending a message, we're doing our work, we're finding reservations for the restaurant we want to go to later, we're getting directions, we're making a booking on a flight. We're not thinking that we're using the internet to do those things, we're just doing the things themselves. And my argument is that we are fast becoming post-mobile in the same way that we are post-internet. And all those data and all those trends that I started off the webinar with, they point to the same fate. It's going to become so pervasive that you will no longer say things like, I know, I'll use my phone to do that. Or did you know you can do that on a phone now? Or I'm going to go on my phone for a couple hours, right? These are not things, in fact, I don't think you probably find these statements very natural now. And just think about in a few years how strange you're going to find it if you actually hear somebody say one of these things. Is this a reality in terms of what people are actually doing? Well, we actually have some data from a survey that we did with senior buyers of consulting services, and here's what we found, and it suggests the same thing. So 100% of everybody we surveyed had a smartphone, and 2 or more laptops or desktops they use daily, usually like a laptop for work and something at home. And they use them daily. 80% of those people also had a tablet, right? And here's the really fascinating thing. They switched devices 5 to 7 times during the day without really thinking about it. When you talked about when did you switch or how did you do that, they really couldn't tell us because they don't really think about I'm going to switch from my phone to the tablet. It's just something they do naturally. And none of the people here mark themselves as technically advanced. Not one thought of themselves. Not one thought of themselves as a techie. And yet look at what they're doing. They have 3, maybe 4 devices. They're switching between them constantly. They're doing it without thinking, like it's natural and easy, and yet none of them think of themselves as technically advanced. So finally, and thanks for waiting, here's what we get to the theme. I think all of this means that the post-mobile phase of mobile strategy means we will be talking about continuity. And that means we're going to be talking about how to connect mobile interactions with other online and offline activities. We're going to start talking about how can we make interactions start on one device and have them completed or at least continue on another. And we're going to have to talk about how can we align what we're doing so seamlessly that we don't have to think about the device anymore, so that nobody who's trying to reach or interact with us has to think about that I'm using the firm's, web page versus mobile page versus some other context. We want them to just interact with us. We don't want them to think about the device. How does this math happen? So I'm going to actually talk to you a few case studies of people who I think are making this happen right now, and I'm going to start off with bonobos. Everybody who knows me well is like, yes, this is where I find some clothes. In fact, this is a real live case study. This happened, so I'm just going to narrate you through it. I got a last-minute invite to go to a black-tie ball because, yes, in my life, that's a realistic scenario. So I got invited to a black-tie ball, and then I realized that the tux that I had in my closet is from 2001, and obviously I was not going to wear a tux made in 2001 to this ball, so I had to find a tux quick. So I turned to these guys, and the situation was I was actually on a plane, and I was using airplane Wi-Fi to do this, and I got up onto my laptop, and I opened it up, and I found the tuxedo that I wanted. I know that the size would fit me because I have other clothes from them, so I tried to complete it, and then we started to descend, and the internet connection cut out completely. And I was like, oh, shoot, I'll have to do it after I land. So after we landed, I can't pull my laptop up because it's like packed in my bag, and I need to just quickly do it. So I take the tablet that was in the seat pocket in front of me, and I'm like, okay, I'll try to do this on the tablet. And I open it up on the tablet as we taxi to the gate, and the great thing is my entire cart was there, right, when I went to the same website. Everything that I had done, I didn't have to go hunt for the same thing and add it to the cart again. In fact, it was right there. I could just start the checkout process. And then we got to the gate, and I had to get off the plane, but I couldn't complete that. So finally, I'm getting out to the curb of the airport, and before I leave the airport, I open up my phone. They already have the cart. They already have the shipping address, the billing address. I got out. All I have to do is finish it, which I did. I totally hit complete my purchase. It was awesome. And then I realized I'd sent it to the wrong shipping address. So there was this button that said, do you need to talk to somebody about your order? So I clicked it, and on came the phone. And when I called the person, I said, hi, I just completed an order, but I need to change the shipping. And they said, yeah, was it this tuxedo? And I was floored. I was like, no way. And because they're all hipsters and work in Brooklyn, he was like, wait. Because apparently their CRM system, if you call in from a phone, connects it to your account, pulls up on a screen, he knows exactly what I'm calling about before I call. My point is that this is not just a great mobile moment, but because they've connected their systems so that no matter what device I come in, I can continue this process exactly where I left off. You can also see that through things like Kindle and Audible. It's the same thing. I think if you use either one of these things, you'll notice that you can not just use several different devices to read your Kindle books. You can read them on these different platforms, and you can always pick up where you left off. It's going to keep track of you across any of those devices. And finally, Apple does a really great version of this. You knew that when it came to design and mobile, I was going to bring Apple up eventually. But I think the feature that I'm most fascinated with is what they're calling Handoff. So it's not switching just of content like Kindle and Bonobos, right? It's not just offering you the same content. You can actually switch complex and in-depth actions from one device to another midstream. So if you're on a phone, you can change the device used for that phone. In fact, if you have an iPhone and a laptop, and somebody calls you, it'll ring on your iPhone. It'll also ring on your laptop as long as they're on the same network. You can text from any device. You can start and finish emails without having to do the save draft and then go find it in the draft. You can do the same things with documents. You can edit and work on them, and then when you go back to it or if you go to it on a different device, it's going to it's going to show you exactly where you left off. And also even the web. If you, for example, open up a web browser on your tablet and you go to the desktop, it's easy to see. Just bring up that exact tab at the exact same location that I had on my iPad. I just want to see it on the desktop now. Handoff lets you do all of that. So what does it take? I'd say, this part is a little hard. It's hard to delineate what the best practice is that this kind of world looks like, a mobile strategy that's focused on continuity. But you can observe a few basic things that people are doing that help create the necessary infrastructure. And I'm going to take a really brief look at the foundations in US and strategy, brand and design, and technology and platforms. So briefly, with US and strategy, the real key to focusing in on continuity of the interactions is that you have to understand not just how they interact with you, but how they use that device more broadly. You really have to understand beyond what it is that they want out of you, you have to understand what their world looks like. And that means turning to something that we call ethnographic research, which is generally open-ended. It's holistic. It tries to take a look at their whole world. It's embedded in their world, right? It searches for friction and flow and default habits. It's just trying to understand them. What does their world look like? How do they use these things? How do they use different kinds of information? And then you use that to generate things like new product ideas, differentiation, priorities, what you should be focusing on, what you can leave alone. Now, I think in general in B2B buying, a lot of people have been really skeptical about mass market research, and one of the main reasons is that a lot of companies in B2B, and particularly in professional services, have a very limited set of buyers, right? They might be saying, look, I'm only going for C-level executives and above. Mass market research just doesn't apply to me, and I would agree. But ethnographic research is just as relevant, if not more relevant, for businesses like that, for that have a limited number of buyers. I would say if you have a limited number of buyers, then it's even more important that you know what their world is like. In brand and design, you're really going to see a shift, not so much in exactly what they do, but in terms of how they frame it, and here's why. They're going to move things from focusing on how things look to how things feel, particularly because as they shift from one device to another, they know that certain things have to change. They know that the screen size, the capabilities of the device are going to provide different constraints in different contexts, and it's going to be really hard to maintain exact standards on that something must look in a particular way. But by focusing on the experience it creates, that's how they're going to create a flexible platform that can still maintain brand consistency. And I have a couple of examples here. The BBC publishes a global experience language, which is, if you notice here, it's really focused on the notion of being pioneering, authentic, these more descriptive or emotive words rather than the specific visual words. Google, of course, has launched material design, which a lot of people know is a whole design system that is device independent and yet inherently digital. And not only can you take a look through material design to understand what does that look like, but they actually provide specific guidance on how to make sure that you continue to express brand within material design. So how does brand stay present and even at the front as you pursue this kind of design technique. Finally, technology, and then I think this is really important. those experiences that I saw, the sort of bonobos experience that wowed me, the Kindle, which just makes everything so easy, the Apple experience, which is almost kind of magical the first time you can pass a phone call from your iPhone to a desktop, it's only possible because all of these companies, they know who you are. In fact, they know who you specifically are. Each one of these is tied together through a kind of cloud service or a user profile. They can create that experience because they understand that it's you each time you come to them, even if you're coming to them from a completely different direction. Now, what's ironic is that most B2B companies have a lot of information about those users. They know who's buying from them down to the level of individuals, but they rarely connect it to anything that they're doing within marketing B2B. And the prediction that I'm making here is that in order to create this sort of experience, they're going to start to create data ecosystems that are thoroughly connected, right, that connect their web to their email, to their social networking, maybe even to the finance system, maybe even to what I'm calling work product, which is digital interaction you might have with a client simply as part of the work, right, turning over documents or receiving things from them. They're going to create these ecosystems that connect all of them, and they're going to be putting the user at the center. The user is what, data-wise, is going to be connecting and ensuring that the experience is consistent across all of it. So some final thoughts. Where is this all heading? I think, I said earlier that the shift from phase 1 to phase 2 is about to transition from platform to design. I think you can see from what I showed you when I was talking about continuity that you're really, in this phase, shifting the thinking from design to experience. And what does that mean? I think, as I was thinking about this and wrapping up this webinar, I really thought that there was one overarching conclusion about the progress of mobile, about where it's been and where I thought it was going. And that was that really, when you were talking about mobile, you were really talking about digital. And ultimately, that meant you were really just talking about strategy. That's what post-mobile is really going to mean. In a world where mobile is so present that you no longer think about it very hard and you no longer mention it, then every time you're thinking about a mobile context, you're simply assuming that everything that you can do as a business can be delivered through digital, and that when you talk about being digital, that means mobile is already included. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm willing to take questions now. If anybody has some.
Yep. Just a reminder, if you have a question, you can submit it using the chat function located either in the lower right-hand corner of your screen or within the green drop-down bar at the top of your screen. We're going to take a minute to collect the questions that we've received, and then we'll be right back to start the Q&A session. First question, what about mobile first? You didn't mention it in your webinar.
Yeah, that was deliberate. I did not mention mobile first. For those of you who aren't familiar, mobile first is kind of a design strategy that says that I would say belongs in phase 2, right? I would say it's part of phase 2. And what it says is instead of trying to squeeze everything you're doing in desktop onto a mobile, what you should do is design the mobile experience first and then expand it up to a desktop. Well, what we have seen here, and this has been backed up by research that a lot of other people have done, is notice that that sounds great, except that just like when you have a lot of problems, if you just start to squeeze everything you're doing on a desktop into a mobile, you can also see the desktop experience suffer if it's just a bigger version of what you designed for mobile. So really when you're approaching responsive web design, the idea of mobile first is a good corrective to your thinking, but that the reality is that you really do have to design for all platforms at once. It's not always easy, but it's something that you really need to do.
Great. Our next question, do you think wearables are relevant in this discussion of the post-mobile world?
Well, I feel like I should ask Tanya, who's here, because she actually owns an Apple Watch. Yeah, when the Apple Watch came out, I'm sure some marketers were like, oh God, how am I going to squeeze all my website into a screen that is literally the size of a postage stamp? And I understand that too. The answer is you're not. Nobody's going to ever browse the web on a tiny thing, at least not in terms of how we think about browsing the web right now. So a couple things to say about wearables. The first is, do you all remember the last wearable that we freaked out about, Google Glass? Well, it doesn't exist really anymore. At least it exists in a business version, but not in a consumer version. It didn't happen. So I do think that you had time to sort of wait and see. The second thing I would say is that the Apple Watch is primarily now about notifications, and that might have applications to your business, but it's not really about information consumption. And I think Apple has been pretty clear about that. It's definitely an important part of, I think, and may well become an important part of your digital life, but it's handling something other than information consumption, which means that I don't know that it will always apply to the same range of marketing scenarios that a handheld like a phone will. And then the final thing is I think that we're really early on, but I actually suspect a lot of interactions with our handheld to be focused less on the screen itself and more on voice interactions. In other words, I think as handhelds mature, we'll see a lot more of talking to people like Siri or Cortana than we will be dealing with the screen. And it's simply too early to know exactly what that interaction will look like.
We have time to take one more question. The trouble with the ecosystem is that most law firms have unique email, CRM, and CMS systems. Two of the three may speak to each other, but the third is missing, which then needs to be replaced and requires significant cost and time. How do you sell leadership on this ecosystem that can work across email, web, and mobile?
Yeah, that's a really fair question. I didn't mean to imply that, all of the infrastructure is there and it's just a matter of plugging wires in, and that's totally fair. I think a lot of people would need a lot of work on that ecosystem. I would say that I've met an increasing number of people who are very interested in building particularly that ecosystem. They're just getting started now, which is, if you think of the timeline that I laid out, kind of about right? I mean, even as we're working in phase 2, it's not wrong to start thinking about the infrastructure for phase 3. So we are being asked to think about data ecosystems where CRM is at the center and is connected to email, social, web. So there are some people. I think the big question is, how do you sell it? And the way that we've always done it in terms of explaining this to stakeholders is, no ecosystem map is going to work. No list of features is going to work, right? You really have to tell the stories. And that means literally telling user stories. You actually have to lay out what is this going to enable in terms of that sort of narrative description of what a client or an important user is going to be able to do, and do that in a way tying in, right? So if you want to tell a story that's focused in on somebody attending an event and, coming to the website, it recognizes who they are as a person because it knows who they are. They can see a private event. They see the invites, they get directions, maybe they're at the event, they can see who's speaking in an after event, they get email, and all of that is entirely seamless, and they're checking several different devices. You could absolutely tell a story like that that's in the theme of what I talked about today. And that's what you would need to be able to do to tell stakeholders why it is so important. At least in my experience, that's the key to at least starting the conversation.
Great. So that wraps up the Q&A session. If we weren't able to get to your question, or if you have any other additional questions about anything mentioned in today's webinar, feel free to contact marketing@onenorth.com. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a great rest of your day.